Good afternoon. It is September 7th, and I'm Janet McElligott in Los Angeles, California. I've been waiting for a little bit to do a report on the allegations of chemical weapons in Sudan. And the reason I was waiting is because by this time, those allegations which came up and were put into the information sphere, I don't know quite what to call it, would have shown clearly by now if chemical weapons were actually used. Because in history, when chemical weapons have been used, whether it's sarin gas or mustard gas or even uranium-235, it takes a minute sometimes to see the injuries that come about because of it. So those injuries that come about because of chemical weapons include respiratory illness. They include sinus problems. They include burns, physical burns on skin. And they also have neurological damage. And we would have seen all of that by now if any of these allegations were accurate. Instead, what we have seen in the capital of Khartoum, where these chemical weapons supposedly were utilized by the armed forces on civilians, instead what we have seen is dysentery and cholera. What we have seen are psychological illnesses and damage, but it's because, in my opinion, of the rapes and the pillaging of the Rapid Support Forces and Hemeti, who is the head of the RSF. Hemeti, who is trying to create a separate government to be recognized by the world, especially the United States. And all of this is being pushed by the criminals. And I use that word specifically because it is a criminal act to support genocide, to support a terrorist group, which the RSF is. And so when I say criminals in Abu Dhabi and Dubai, I use that with purpose, and I use that specifically. Anyone who supports the Rapid Support Forces, Hemeti, who gives them weapons, who gives them aid of any kind, are supporting a terrorist group. And that is something that the United Nations can, and The Hague can do something about. Because these allegations of chemical weapons would have produced blisters. I haven't seen any of that. What I have seen are people going back home and finding they have no electricity, finding their homes have been stripped of copper wires, finding that in this tremendous heat, because even in Los Angeles today, it's 90 degrees, which for us is pretty hot. But I haven't seen seizures being reported. I haven't seen mustard gas burns. I haven't seen any of this. And so any of the, let's call them strikes against the armed forces, are nothing but false, in my opinion. And we've seen this before with the Sudanese and with the Sudanese government. In 1998, President Bill Clinton lobbed bombs at El Shifa Pharmaceutical, calling it a part of Osama bin Laden's vast military complex, and said that it made the precursor to EMPTA. I was one of the first people there when the factory was still on fire. I was there with NBC News. And what we discovered is it was all a big fat lie. It was disinformation. And part of the reason that disinformation works in Sudan, at least for a while, is because the Sudanese government is pathetic about understanding how to use the media. They're terrible at public relations and telling their own story because they think people will come and find out for themselves. Well, guess what? People don't do that. What the government found in '98 was that they had to call on the United Nations to do an actual investigation. And I would suggest that you do that again, because if not, these lies that are spread by Hemeti will continue. And this idea of a second parallel government will look legitimate until it all falls apart. And believe me, liars always fall apart. As Taylor Swift says, haters gonna hate, hate, hate. So don't let the Sudanese citizens suffer because you aren't doing your job. Do your job. Call on a United Nations investigation into the allegations of chemical weapons, because I suspect people will find out it's a big fat lie. Clear your name. Thank you.